After checking their shared bank account, Ethan Ward froze, not because of the number he saw, but because of the name beside it. $100 million transferred to Nathan Pierce, his best friend, the man who'd toasted at his wedding, the man he trusted with both business and blood. For a moment, the screen blurred, and his world, built on loyalty, finance, and faith, tilted into quiet disbelief. Across the kitchen, Madison Ward moved through the morning light like nothing had happened, pouring coffee, kissing his cheek, humming softly, unaware that her routine had just become evidence. Ethan's fingers hovered above the trackpad, his mind racing between reason and betrayal. Why would his wife move that kind of money to his best friend? Was it business, blackmail, or something darker hidden beneath affection? The numbers didn't lie, but could she? He watched her walk away, gym bag slung casually, and in that moment, curiosity sharpened into suspicion, love into calculation. But what would a man like Ethan, a strategist worth billions, calm as precision itself, do when the betrayal isn't whispered but wired? And when Madison returns home that evening, will she face the husband she married or the quiet storm she just created? The sound of her car backing down the driveway was the cue. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. He clicked print statements, and the hum of the printer filled the silence like an echo of his heartbeat. 6 months of bank records rolled out in mechanical rhythm. He watched the pages stack up, each one a snapshot of trust turned transactional. He slipped the printouts into a manila folder, labeled it Tax 2224, and slid it under a stack of financial files. Then, with the same steady composure he'd once used to close billion-dollar deals, he reached for his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in years. Brooke Langford, forensic accountant, old colleague, and one of the few people who understood how deceit hides in the numbers. "Brooke," he said when she picked up, his voice a low current of restraint. "I need you to look at something." Quietly. There was no need for details. Brooke had seen this tone before. The voice of a man who just lost certainty, but not control. "I'll be there by evening," she said simply. Ethan hung up, closed the laptop, and stared at the untouched breakfast Madison had left behind. Scrambled eggs cooling beside 2 slices of toast. Ordinary things, but they felt staged now, like props in a theater of betrayal. He stood there for a while, letting the reality settle like sediment. Madison had been the kind of woman who made chaos look like elegance. Her laugh once filled their home with warmth. Her belief in him, in his rise from a small-time equity analyst to founder of Ward Capital, had been the foundation of everything, or so he thought. The memory hit him hard, a flashback to their early years in Boston, when she'd surprise him with lunch at his cubicle and whisper, "You'll run your own firm someday, Ethan. I believe in your discipline." Those words had shaped him. But discipline, he realized now, can also build walls around pain. By the time afternoon light stretched across his study, he wasn't thinking about heartbreak anymore. He was thinking about process. Betrayal was no longer an emotion. It was data waiting to be analyzed. At precisely 5:46 p.m., the doorbell chimed. Brooke Langford stepped in, her black briefcase in hand, gray-streaked hair tied back neatly. She didn't offer condolences or curiosity, only professionalism. "Show me," she said. Ethan laid out the printouts across the dining table. Brooke scanned them, pen tapping rhythmically, her brows furrowed. "This isn't random," she murmured. "The transfers started small, 50,000, then 500. She was testing access thresholds. The 100 million wasn't an accident. It was a culmination." Ethan didn't flinch. "Find out where it went and what connects them. Every layer." Brooke nodded. "And her?" He looked toward the window where Madison's white SUV was just pulling into the drive. The sun reflected sharply against the glass. "Her," he said evenly. "We'll study later." When Madison stepped through the door, cheerful from her workout, Ethan greeted her with the same calm affection. He smiled, kissed her cheek, and asked how her day was. The mask fit perfectly. As she laughed and began talking about dinner plans, Ethan's mind moved with precision, already cataloging her tone, her words, the tiny hesitation when she mentioned Nathan's name. The game had begun. Brooke's report arrived the next evening in a sealed black folder, 3 inches thick, bound with red tape, stamped confidential review. Ethan waited until Madison left for her evening spa appointment before breaking the seal. He didn't pour whiskey or brace himself with anything stronger than breath. The act itself felt surgical. Inside, the pages told a story in numbers, one that had been written beneath his roof. Transfers, digital signatures, secondary routing accounts, and a hidden lease agreement for a luxury apartment in Madison's name. Every entry was clean, precise, intentional. Brooke sat across from him, laptop open, her glasses glinting in the dim light. "She's clever," she said. "Used fractional transfers through shell subsidiaries. Each move disguised as consulting fees from Pierce Capital Holdings." Ethan's expression didn't change. "That's Nathan's firm." Brooke nodded. "Exactly. You've been financing them both." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. The betrayal no longer stung. It settled like ash. He had built entire systems to predict market collapses before they happened, yet somehow missed the collapse of his own marriage. Brooke studied him carefully. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing yet," he said. "Not until the picture's complete." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Ethan, there's more." She pushed forward a photo, security camera stills from Ridgeview Apartments, Madison and Nathan, arms brushing, a shared key card, dates that matched the first suspicious transfers. For a brief moment, the air seemed to thicken around him. The world narrowed to that grainy photograph, his wife laughing in a man's car. But then something inside him stilled completely. The human reaction, the urge to rage, to shout, never came. What replaced it was focus. He gathered the documents into a clean pile, tied them neatly with the same red tape, and labeled the folder, Tax 2024, Final Audit. Then he smiled, faintly but genuinely. "Thank you, Brooke. Send me your invoice under Ward Family Trust. Keep everything encrypted." Brooke gave him a long look. "You're not confronting her?" Ethan shook his head. "Confrontation makes noise. I prefer process." That evening, when Madison returned home, her hair damp from the steam room, she found him in the kitchen, slicing lemons and humming softly. He greeted her with warmth so effortless it disarmed her. They ate dinner by the window overlooking the lake, the reflection of the city lights shimmering like fragments of illusion. Madison talked about Nathan again, casually, how his new expansion deal might be worth investing in. Her tone was easy, teasing. Ethan laughed along, even feigned interest, his questions carefully balanced between curiosity and indifference. When she left to check emails upstairs, he watched her go, the rhythm of her heels echoing down the hallway. Then he turned off the music and stood alone in the silence. A memory surfaced. New York, 7 years ago, when Nathan had been best man at their wedding. Madison's veil had caught in the wind, and Nathan had been the one to untangle it. Ethan remembered how easily their eyes met, how quickly they both looked away. The image had flashed through his mind once before, but he'd dismissed it. Now it replayed with new meaning. By midnight, Ethan had locked the house systems, new passwords, new permissions. Even the cameras he'd installed for security were now rerouted to a private cloud accessible only to him. He spent hours cataloging Brooke's findings, tagging files under a directory titled Phase 1. His strategic mind, trained to dismantle corporate fraud, now turned toward his own home. Each act of betrayal became evidence. Each act of affection, a potential clue. Before dawn, he placed a silent call to Cassandra Monroe, a high-stakes attorney who had once represented him in a corporate acquisition. "Cass," he said softly, "I need your expertise, but not for business." There was a pause on the other end before her voice came, measured, crisp. "Understood. How deep?" "Deep enough that she never sees it coming." When he ended the call, he looked toward the faint glow of the city through the curtains. Madison slept upstairs, unaware that the man beside her had already begun her quiet undoing. The morning would come with sunlight, coffee, and smiles. But from that moment forward, Ethan Ward would never again be the husband she thought she knew. Cassandra Monroe's office occupied the 43rd floor of a mirrored tower overlooking the Seattle skyline, a place where silence cost more than words. When Ethan stepped inside, she was already waiting, her jacket off, sleeves rolled neatly, a woman who preferred precision to decorum. He placed Brooke's folder on her desk without preamble. She flipped through it, her eyes scanning the pages faster than most people could read a paragraph. When she finally looked up, her expression was unreadable. "Infidelity," she said quietly. "But that's not what you care about." Ethan's voice was calm. "I care about the network beneath it, the accounts, the partnerships, how far Nathan's company ties into mine." Cassandra closed the folder, fingers steepled. "You're not just looking for divorce leverage. You're investigating a merger fraud disguised as adultery." "Exactly," he said. The conversation unfolded like a chess match. Cassandra outlined scenarios: joint asset freezes, trust fund diversions, paternity clauses. Ethan listened, nodding slowly, his responses precise and minimal. There was no talk of vengeance, only logistics. "You'll need documentation admissible in court," she said. "Not emotional proof, real proof." "Brooke can handle the data," Ethan replied. "You handle the law." Cassandra leaned back, assessing him. "You're unusually composed for someone discovering his wife's affair and $100 million theft." He gave a faint smile. "Rage is unproductive." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "And revenge?" "Calculated," he said. Cassandra didn't press further. She drafted a plan across her tablet, 3 quiet phases that could take months but would leave no loose ends: financial lockdown, legal discovery, and public exposure. "Phase 1 begins immediately," she said. "We freeze access to every joint account and reassign financial authority under your trust's operating clause. She'll think it's system maintenance." "Good," Ethan said softly. "Let's start today." As Cassandra worked, his thoughts drifted back to the early years of his friendship with Nathan Pierce. College dorms, late-night stock discussions, their shared obsession with predictive algorithms. Nathan had been brilliant but reckless, a gambler's soul trapped in an analyst's suit. Ethan had funded his startup once, believing in his potential. He now saw that belief as his first and costliest mistake. By late afternoon, Cassandra's assistant entered with the notarized paperwork. Ethan signed each page with steady precision. His signature, once a symbol of partnership and expansion, was now a quiet declaration of separation. He left the building under a drizzle that blurred the city lights. On the drive home, his phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "Dinner with Nathan and his investors tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The words were almost cruel in their normality. He typed back, "Of course. Hope it goes well," then stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. When he arrived home, the house felt staged again, candles arranged, music playing low, the faint scent of lavender. He poured himself coffee instead of wine and sat by the window overlooking Lake Union. The reflection of the city danced on the water's surface. And for the first time in years, he felt detached from the beauty of it all. Upstairs, he opened his laptop and began cataloging everything: timestamps, routes, cross-referenced emails between Madison and Nathan that Brooke had decrypted. His system, an in-house AI financial model he once built to detect fraud, was now repurposed. Each night, it would flag any anomalies in Madison's spending, her movements, her communications. By midnight, the results glowed across the screen like a constellation of deceit. Hotel charges under aliases, private travel bookings, even a luxury bracelet billed to Pierce Capital. He saved the report into a new encrypted folder named Phase 2. Downstairs, he heard the soft chime of the security gate, the sound of Madison's car returning. He closed the laptop, shut off the lights, and leaned against the window, letting the faint rain mask his thoughts. When she walked in, smiling, radiant in a new dress, she kissed his cheek and asked, "You working late again?" He smiled back, gentle and steady. "Just finishing a review." She poured herself wine, oblivious. "Nathan sends his love. He said you two should grab a drink sometime. He misses you." Ethan chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that hides entire wars. "Yeah," he murmured. "I miss him too." As she drifted upstairs, humming faintly, Ethan looked once more at the dark screen of his laptop, the reflection of his face faint in the glass. The storm wasn't coming. It had already begun. The first sign of the lockdown came quietly, A declined transaction on Madison's phone as she tried to pay for a facial at her favorite spa. She frowned, tapped again, and when it failed a second time, she blamed the card machine. But the second card failed too. The receptionist smiled politely, offering to hold her appointment while she sorted it out. Madison laughed it off, pretending not to care, though unease had already started coiling in her stomach. She drove home, the late afternoon sun painting her windshield gold, rehearsing explanations she'd give Ethan if she needed to. He'd always handled the finances. Maybe he'd notice first. Maybe it was just a system glitch. She could spin it easily, she told herself. She always did. Inside the house, Ethan sat in his study, the blinds half-drawn, light slicing across his desk in geometric lines. His laptop screen showed confirmation of Cassandra's action. Phase 1 complete. All joint accounts were now under his single authorization, every transaction routed through a new verification system. Madison's access was legally suspended pending audit compliance. She wouldn't know that it had all been quietly approved through internal counsel 3 hours ago. He heard her footsteps before she spoke, her heels brisk but unsteady. "Ethan," she called, a controlled brightness in her tone. "Did you notice something wrong with the cards today?" He looked up, expression neutral. "System update, maybe. I got a notice from the bank this morning." Her posture softened. "That explains it. I was starting to panic." He smiled slightly. "No need to. I'll fix it tomorrow." Madison exhaled, reassured. But behind that calm exchange, his mind was already cataloging her reactions. The slight tremor in her hand, the quick relief when he didn't press. Panic, he thought, always begins small. When she left the room, he opened a secure chat with Cassandra. Phase 1 confirmed. She suspects nothing. Proceed with account verification on Pierce Capital. That night, he stood at the balcony overlooking Lake Union, the water calm beneath the city lights. He remembered the early days of their life together, two dreamers in a small apartment, sharing takeout and ambitions. Madison had once sold her grandmother's jewelry to help fund his first algorithmic prototype. She used to say, "We'll build something honest, Ethan, something lasting." He had believed her, not realizing that some people fall in love with the reflection of power, not the person who holds it. Inside, her laughter floated faintly from the living room. She was on a video call with Nathan. He knew from the specific tone she reserved only for him. Brooks' tracking software, quietly integrated into Madison's devices through legal digital consent, picked up the call metadata in real time. Cassandra's system captured it as supplemental evidence under marital discovery laws. By midnight, Ethan reviewed the compiled reports. Financial records, geolocation data, message threads, all admissible. He didn't rush. Vengeance wasn't a sprint, it was architecture. Every structure needed a foundation, a frame, a finish. At 2 a.m, Madison came upstairs and found him awake. "You can't sleep again?" she asked, sliding beside him. "You work too hard." He closed his laptop gently and looked at her. In the dim glow, her face still carried the grace he once adored. "Some things," he said quietly, "are worth working for." She smiled, misunderstanding completely, and kissed his cheek before turning away. He watched her breathing slow, steady, and unguarded. For a fleeting moment, he almost wished she could stay that innocent version forever. The woman who laughed at sunsets and believed in promises. But innocence, he thought, dies the moment it's weighed against greed. Downstairs, his phone vibrated with Cassandra's message. Phase 2 authorized. Discovery in progress. He silenced the alert and looked once more at the sleeping form beside him. Tomorrow would bring the first crack in her perfect world, and she'd never know whose hand had drawn the line. By the end of the week, Madison's unease had grown into a restless sort of panic. Her cards worked intermittently now, just enough to feel random, never enough to feel secure. A part of her blamed the bank. Another, Ethan's obsession with financial controls. He had always been meticulous about money, sometimes maddeningly so, but he had never left her stranded like this. The imbalance made her nervous, and the silence made it worse. Ethan, meanwhile, had already transitioned to phase 2 with Cassandra and Brooke. The new goal wasn't simply control, it was structure. Evidence needed to breathe, to grow in silence before being shown. Brooke had set up a forensic ledger, charting Madison's withdrawals against Nathan's firm deposits. Every move lined up like twin reflections in opposite directions. Cassandra began drafting the preliminary custody documents quietly, using Ethan's growing library of proof. Every clause was deliberate, every timeline clean. That Friday, Ethan left early under the pretext of a board meeting. Instead, he met Cassandra in a small conference room above a downtown law firm. They reviewed affidavits and contracts, witnesses lined up quietly, house managers, personal assistants, accountants. No one dramatic, no one emotional, just data and people who could confirm it existed. Cassandra sipped her espresso as she spoke, her tone level and analytical. "When it's time," she said, "we'll have her pinned legally, financially, and publicly. But don't accelerate. Let her think she's winning." Ethan nodded. "She still thinks she's in control." That night, Madison hosted a dinner with a few influencer friends, the kind who thrived on the illusion of luxury. Ethan watched from the hallway as she floated through the evening like a practiced actress. Wine glass in hand, laughter easy, charm flawless. He wondered how long she'd been rehearsing this version of herself. Every gesture felt choreographed for someone else's validation, perhaps Nathan's. Later, after the guests had gone, she joined him on the balcony, her perfume carried by the wind. "You've been distant lately," she said softly, leaning against the railing. "Work stress?" Ethan turned toward her with gentle precision. "Just analyzing numbers," he said. She smiled faintly. "That's your whole life. Numbers." "Numbers don't lie," he replied, the faintest edge beneath his tone. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but refused to understand it. Inside, his phone buzzed. Brooke's message appeared in encrypted code. Captured, visual proof secured. Attached was a time-stamped photo of Madison and Nathan at Ridgeview Apartments. Again. This time, Nathan was holding the same briefcase Ethan had given him 2 years ago after closing their first partnership. The symbolism was sharp, almost poetic. He locked his phone screen, pocketed it, and turned to Madison, who was still gazing at the water. "Do you ever miss the simplicity we had?" he asked. She blinked, surprised. "Of course. Why?" "Just wondering," he said quietly, "how people change when they get what they thought they wanted." When she went inside, he remained outside for a while, the chill air wrapping around him. He thought about his children, 8-year-old Clara and 5-year-old Mason, who had spent the evening asleep upstairs, unaware that their parents' life was fracturing beneath them. Protecting them wasn't an afterthought. It was the motive that kept him still when rage might have broken him. By midnight, Madison's panic surfaced again. She walked into the study where Ethan was finishing reports. "My card got declined again," she said, voice sharper this time. He looked up with calm neutrality. "Strange. Must be the same system issue. I'll call tomorrow." Her eyes searched his face for any crack of emotion, but found none. "You sure everything's fine, Ethan? You've been different lately." He smiled faintly, controlled. "Maybe I'm just evolving." When she left, he turned back to his screen. The final confirmation from Cassandra blinked into his inbox. Phase 2 complete. Phase 3, authorization pending. Ethan closed the laptop slowly, exhaled, and leaned back. There was no triumph in his expression, only stillness. Revenge, he realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about design. Upstairs, Madison was pacing, rehearsing lies she hadn't yet been accused of telling. Downstairs, Ethan had already written her ending. Rain streaked across the courthouse glass like restless ink, tracing shadows over the crowd outside. It had taken Ethan 3 months of quiet design to arrive at this moment. 3 months of silence, of smiles, of dinners eaten beside a woman who didn't yet realize the ground beneath her was vanishing. Inside courtroom 6B, the tension hummed low and steady, like the sound before a storm breaks. Madison sat beside her lawyer, pale beneath her perfect foundation. Her composure, once a crown, now felt like armor thinning under pressure. Across the aisle, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his calm unbroken. Cassandra Monroe, seated to his right, arranged files into precise alignment. Every document she carried was a blade, proof layered in paper, ink in time-stamped reality. The judge entered. The murmurs died. As proceedings began, Cassandra rose first. Her voice was steady, deliberate, surgical. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Ethan Ward, seeks full custody of his two minor children in a forensic financial investigation into marital assets following evidence of fraudulent transfers and breach of fiduciary trust. Madison blinked rapidly, turning toward her attorney. What? Fraudulent? She whispered, but the words were already buried beneath Cassandra's presentation. Brooke Langford's evidence unfolded like a slow-motion catastrophe, each exhibit projected on the courtroom monitor. Transfers, shell accounts, leases, surveillance photos, Ridgeview Apartments, Madison and Nathan entering, leaving. Every timestamp aligned with bank movements. The courtroom grew colder with each slide. Madison's breathing quickened, her denial dissolving into disbelief. Her attorney objected twice, both overruled. The judge's eyes were sharp but unreadable. Cassandra moved seamlessly from financial misconduct to personal betrayal. Additionally, Your Honor, we have reason to request paternity verification for the Ward children based on the overlap of financial and personal timelines. Madison's face drained of color. No, she muttered under her breath. No, that's not. But the request was granted. The test results were already sealed in the clerk's envelope. Cassandra opened it, her tone unchanged. Results confirm that Mason Ward is not biologically the child of Mr. Ward. A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Madison covered her mouth. Nathan, present at the rear, pale and sweating, looked away. Ethan remained motionless, eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. The judge's voice cut through the silence. Mrs. Ward, do you wish to address the evidence presented? Her hands trembled. He set me up. He planned this. Cassandra's reply was almost gentle. We didn't plan your choices, Mrs. Ward. We only documented them. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the sound of rain. The hearing adjourned with a quiet bang of the gavel, but the echoes lingered. Madison slumped in her chair, mascara streaking, the press already gathering near the door. Nathan disappeared before she could turn. Ethan rose slowly. For the first time since it began, he looked directly at her. No hatred, no gloating, just an exhausted kind of certainty. The look of a man who'd watched every illusion die and decided not to mourn. Then he walked out, Cassandra following, documents in hand. In the hallway, reporters surged forward. Mr. Ward, did you expect this outcome? He paused, his answer calm and simple. Truth always performs better under pressure. By evening, the story broke across every major outlet. Betrayal in billions, the Ethan Ward case. Madison's influencer sponsors suspended contracts within hours. Nathan's firm, Pierce Capital, collapsed overnight under federal scrutiny. The world learned what Ethan had known for weeks, that silence can be a weapon more devastating than any outburst. Later that night, Ethan stood at the window of his apartment, city lights shimmering against the glass. He could see his reflection, a man unbroken, yet changed. Cassandra's message arrived moments later. Custody granted. Asset control transferred. It's over, he typed back. It's only over when I stop remembering. Then set the phone down and turned to the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, the storm he'd built was still unfolding, reshaping lives he'd once shared. But for now, he stood still, the architect of ruin, the keeper of calm. The custody hearing took place in early spring, under skies so clear they felt indifferent. The courthouse gardens were dotted with cameras and murmurs, reporters, family law observers, and strangers who had followed the trial like serialized fiction. Inside, however, everything was muted precision, the rhythm of shoes against marble, the low hum of anticipation, and the faint, measured voice of Ethan Ward as he testified. He spoke with restrained clarity, explaining timelines, accounts, and the subtle erosion of trust that had led him here. He didn't mention the affair by name, only referred to inappropriate financial entanglements with Mr. Pierce. Cassandra guided him carefully, shaping every answer like evidence sculpted from restraint. There were no theatrics, no raised voices. The courtroom seemed to bend toward his stillness. Madison sat at the opposite table, her once polished poise now fraying at the edges. She looked smaller somehow, the kind of small that no designer clothing could disguise. Her eyes darted between the judge and the rows behind Ethan, where a few former employees from Pierce Capital had come forward voluntarily, whispering testimony of altered ledgers and quiet cover-ups. Nathan had not appeared since the fraud investigation deepened. Word was he'd fled to Belize to avoid indictment. When the judge called recess, Madison caught Ethan's gaze. For a heartbeat, something human flickered there. Recognition, perhaps even apology, but it was gone before it could breathe. Ethan simply turned away, focused again on his children, who waited outside with a family counselor. Their presence was why he never let rage near his words. Back in the courtroom, Cassandra presented the final argument with the calm of inevitability. "Your Honor," she said, "this case has shown not merely infidelity, but a deliberate financial breach of trust involving marital assets. Mr. Ward's actions since discovery have been transparent, protective, and lawful. He seeks custody not out of vengeance but necessity. The children's environment requires stability, and Mrs. Ward's decisions have demonstrated consistent recklessness, emotionally and financially." The judge's verdict came that afternoon. Custody granted to Ethan Ward, marital property frozen pending restitution hearings, spousal support denied on grounds of misconduct. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Madison's sob broke through the hush, a sound raw enough to still every whisper. She didn't look at Ethan when she left. She just walked past, her heels echoing too loud in the corridor, the sound of a woman exiting her own empire. Ethan remained seated for a while. The relief didn't feel triumphant. It felt surgical, clean but irreversible. Cassandra placed a quiet hand on the folder between them. "You did it," she said. "No," he murmured. "She did." Outside, the cameras exploded in light. Reporters fired questions. Was he satisfied? Would he press criminal charges? Was forgiveness possible? Ethan paused, then offered a single line that became the quote of the year. "I don't measure loss in money. I measure it in silence." That night, the headlines were merciless. Pierce Capital collapses amid fraud investigation. Madison Ward's empire in free fall. Every channel replayed the same footage of Ethan leaving the courthouse, composed, expressionless, his children holding each of his hands as they walked to the waiting car. Madison, by contrast, vanished from public view within days. Her sponsors withdrew, her social pages went dark, and her former friends distanced themselves with polite statements. Nathan's company folded into bankruptcy proceedings before month's end, and his name became shorthand in financial circles for betrayal and collapse. Ethan spent the following weeks rebuilding quietly, restoring routines, packing school lunches, teaching Clara and Mason to ride their bikes near Lake Union. For the first time in years, laughter returned to the house naturally, not as performance. He still worked long hours, but now he worked from home more often, the children's voices grounding him like gravity. One night, Clara asked from the hallway, "Dad, are you still sad about Mommy?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "No, sweetheart. Just learning how to stop remembering." She nodded as if she understood, then ran back to her brother's room, leaving him in the soft glow of the living room lamp. Ethan leaned back on the couch, the quiet settling around him like truth. The man who once built fortunes now built something rarer, peace. By summer, the city had moved on, but Madison hadn't. The media's fascination had faded, replaced by newer scandals, fresher tragedies. Yet her name still lingered in search engines. Madison Ward, the fall of the financier's wife. Every headline told the same story from different angles. Betrayal, exposure, consequence. She lived now in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queen Anne, a steep downgrade from the Bel Air glass estate she once filled with parties and silk. The designer dresses had been sold quietly online to cover legal fees. The last of her jewelry, the emerald necklace Ethan once gave her on their 5th anniversary, sat unsold in a pawn shop window. Its price tag a cruel reminder that value can shrink overnight. Most days she didn't leave the apartment. She scrolled through old photos, rewound her life like a film she couldn't stop rewatching. Ethan holding Claire on his shoulders at Pike Place Market. Mason learning to swim. Her own laughter frozen in pixels. It was easier to study the memories than to live with the reality that she had been both architect and casualty of her own downfall. Nathan, she heard, had fled first to Belize, then to Dubai. The fraud investigations had intensified, investors were closing in, and warrants had been filed. His messages to her, pleas, excuses, apologies, had stopped abruptly 2 months ago. Rumors said he'd been detained abroad under a false passport. The silence that followed was both relief and punishment. Back in Lake Union, Ethan's world had rebuilt itself quietly. His days followed rhythm, morning jogs with Mason on his bike beside him, school drop-offs, consulting calls from his minimalist home office. Brooke had closed her report months ago. Cassandra's final settlements were complete. Ethan had paid every debt, returned every cent, and left nothing pending. Not legally, not emotionally. On a Sunday morning, he sat at the park while Clara painted on a sketch pad. Her drawings were all suns and boats and smiling faces. She handed him one and said, "That's you, Dad. You look happy again." He smiled gently. "Do I?" "Yeah," she said, squinting at the sky. "You don't look like you're thinking so much anymore." He didn't answer right away. The truth was, he still thought, just differently now. The noise of vengeance had gone, replaced by a quiet kind of order. He'd learned that justice, when patient, didn't shout. It arrived softly through balance and endurance. That evening, he walked to his study and opened a small package that had arrived earlier. A book, The Quiet Man, The Story of Ethan Ward by Claire Hammond. On the first page, she had written, "Some wars end without casualties. Others end with definition." He closed it slowly, setting it beside a framed photo of his children. Madison's face was cropped out, a decision Clara had made months ago while decorating the living room. He hadn't corrected her. At dusk, the reflection of the lake shimmered through the window. Ethan stood there for a while, watching the ripples fade. He thought of Madison, alone somewhere, perhaps finally realizing that her greatest loss wasn't the money, but the man who had never raised his voice even as he dismantled her world. Peace, he realized, wasn't the absence of pain. It was mastery over it, and in that stillness, he finally understood why revenge had never been his language. It had always been precision, patience, and proof. He turned off the lights and stepped outside, the children's laughter carrying across the yard. The air smelled clean, rain-washed, honest. He let the night take him. No anger left, no noise to silence, only the sound of life continuing. The quiet man had won, not by shouting louder than betrayal, but by outlasting it. When The Quiet Man hit shelves that September, it didn't just sell, it detonated. Claire Hammond's name trended within hours of the launch. Her measured prose had turned Ethan Ward's silence into myth. The cover, a grayscale photograph of a man's silhouette reflected in city glass, carried only a single tagline. He dismantled betrayal without raising his voice. Ethan found out about the book the same way the rest of Seattle did, through a push notification on his phone. He was in the middle of helping Mason with a math assignment when a headline blinked across the screen. "Inside the mind of Ethan Ward, the billionaire who fought infidelity with precision, not rage." He almost laughed. He hadn't spoken to Claire Hammond in over a year. The last time they'd met, she was researching corporate accountability and had interviewed him about leadership under pressure. He had no idea she'd been piecing together his story from public filings, testimonies, and whispers. That night, when the children were asleep, he sat by the fire and opened the copy that had arrived by courier. An advance copy with a short handwritten note inside. "You never spoke, so I did it for you. Claire." The first chapter began in the exact place he'd started this journey, the morning he saw the transfer in their shared account. Claire's words were hauntingly close to truth, her research exhaustive but restrained. She described his stillness not as revenge, but as discipline. She quoted the judge's statement, "Mr. Ward conducted himself with integrity under extraordinary provocation," and then layered it with witness perspectives, Brooke's quiet admiration, Cassandra's clinical precision, even a former intern's recollection of Ethan saying, "Anger is an investment that yields nothing." Ethan read through the night. By dawn, the fireplace had burned low, and he closed the book with a strange mix of disbelief and relief. The world finally understood what he'd never intended to explain. That justice doesn't always shout, and that the loudest victories sometimes sound like nothing at all. When he walked into his office later that morning, his assistant was already fielding interview requests from news outlets, podcasts, and documentary producers. He declined them all. The attention didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exposure. He wasn't a hero, just a man who refused to drown in his own fury. That afternoon, he received an email from Madison. Just one line. "They turned you into a legend. Do you ever miss being human?" He read it twice, then deleted it without reply. Weeks passed, and the book climbed charts. Corporate ethics seminars quoted it. Relationship blogs dissected it. In business schools taught it as a case study in emotional intelligence under betrayal. Through it all, Ethan remained still. He gave no statements, attended no panels, signed no rights to film adaptations. He watched quietly as his story became everyone else's conversation. One evening, Claire called. "You're the only man who ever made silence profitable," she said, half joking. He smiled faintly. "No," he replied, "I just learned it costs less than chaos." When he hung up, he looked out at the water again. The lights shimmered softly, reflections never still, but always returning to form. Mason's laughter drifted from upstairs, mingling with Clara's piano practice. This was his language now, not vengeance, not legend, but life continuing. He opened The Quiet Man one last time and underlined a single sentence. Revenge fades, but structure endures. Then he set the book on the shelf, turned off the lights, and let the quiet reclaim its rightful place. It started with an invitation, printed on heavy cardstock, sealed in deep navy wax. Claire Hammond requests the presence of Mr. Ethan Ward at the Seattle Art Institute for the launch of the documentary adaptation of The Quiet Man. Private screening and reception to follow. Ethan held the card in silence for a long while, fingers tracing the embossed lettering. He hadn't expected Claire to go further than the book. He'd given no permissions, no interviews, but technically everything had been public record. Still, something in him hesitated. The story had already left his hands. Now it was being curated, dramatized, consumed. He didn't want to be anyone's parable. That evening, he stood by the lake with a coffee, watching the sun slip behind the skyline. Clara and Mason played nearby, laughing as they tried to skip stones. He thought of how far they'd come from that courtroom day, the slow rebuilding of their world, the rhythm of peace. But the invitation burned faintly in his pocket, a reminder that closure sometimes arrives disguised as recognition. He didn't decide until the last minute. On the night of the premiere, he put on a dark suit, not the tailored armor of his old life, just simple and clean. Cassandra had sent a brief text earlier. "You don't owe them presents, but you might owe yourself perspective." The theater was dim and reverent, the kind of place where silence felt sacred. Claire spotted him immediately when he entered. Her eyes widened, then softened. She didn't approach, only nodded, a silent acknowledgement between two people who had seen the same truth from opposite angles. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life. The documentary began not with narration, but with that same image, a man sitting alone in his kitchen, bank statement glowing on the screen. The camera lingered on the tremor in his hand, the sound of the printer spitting out evidence, the hum of quiet betrayal. Ethan felt his chest tighten, remembering the weight of that first discovery, the moment the foundation cracked but didn't yet fall. Then came the testimonies. Brooke describing how his calm scared me more than any anger could. Cassandra recounting how he didn't just build a legal case, he built a map out of his own heartbreak. Even the judge's voice, clipped and factual, Mr. Ward displayed restraint beyond expectation. When Madison's segment appeared, the room shifted. The footage was grainy, captured months ago, her first and only public statement since the trial. She sat by a window, face bare, voice subdued. "I thought power was freedom," she said quietly, "but power without honesty is a prison. He never raised his voice at me, not once. That silence still follows me." Ethan's breath caught just for a second. He didn't expect sympathy, but hearing her say it aloud closed something unfinished inside him. The final scene faded into Claire's voiceover. Sometimes the storm doesn't roar. Sometimes it rearranges the sky until the light finds its way back. The credits rolled. Applause broke out around him, soft but persistent. Claire approached afterward, eyes searching his face for approval or anger. "Did we do it justice?" she asked. He considered the question, then smiled faintly. "You made it honest. That's enough." They stood there for a moment, watching the crowd disperse, the journalists, the critics, the curious. Somewhere behind them, Madison's voice from the film repeated in a loop for interviews. As Ethan left the theater, the night air felt clean. The cameras followed him briefly, hoping for a quote. He gave them the same quiet answer he'd given the world before. Some stories finish best in silence. Driving home, he passed the familiar turn toward Madison's old neighborhood. The windows of her apartment were dark, the street empty. He didn't stop. The past was no longer a weight. It was a landmark he'd already passed. At home, Clara was asleep on the couch. Mason curled beside her. Ethan knelt, pulled a blanket over them, and watched them breathe. For the first time since the betrayal, his heart didn't feel like armor. It felt alive. He whispered softly to himself, not as a vow, but as truth. Peace isn't the reward, it's the rebuild. Outside, the lake reflected the stars, and the quiet man finally, fully, let the night hold him. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday morning in October. Ethan was at a cafe downtown, one of those quiet spots where people pretended to work, but mostly watched the city pass by, when he saw her reflection first. Madison, standing at the counter, ordering coffee. No cameras, no entourage. Just a woman alone, hair pulled into a low bun, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He almost didn't turn, but she noticed him first. Their eyes met in the glass, a split second of frozen time. Recognition mixed with something softer, almost gratitude. She hesitated, then walked toward his table. "Ethan," she said, her voice tentative, as if testing whether she was still allowed to use his name. He gestured to the empty seat. "You can sit." She did carefully, her hands wrapping around the coffee cup for warmth she didn't seem to feel. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile, more like the quiet between two people standing where something once burned. "You saw the documentary," she said finally. "I did." "Did you hate me more after it?" He shook his head. "No, I didn't feel hate. I just saw it all from outside for the first time." She nodded slowly. "I didn't expect them to use that interview. Claire said it would be anonymous." "She told the truth," he said. "That's rare enough." Madison's eyes dropped to her cup. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said softly. "I just wanted to say I finally understand what you were doing. I used to think your silence was cruelty, but it wasn't, was it? It was control." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "It was survival." Her lip trembled. She bit it to keep composure. "I ruined everything we built, and I don't even know why. Maybe I thought money could fix what I didn't know how to feel." He didn't interrupt. He'd learned that some truths were better spoken into air than answered. Madison took a breath, eyes glistening. "I see you with the kids sometimes. You're good with them. I'm glad they have you. Clara drew me a card on Mother's Day, left it in the mailbox. I didn't open it. I couldn't." "She still loves you," Ethan said quietly. "So does Mason. I never changed that for them." She blinked fast, tears threatening. "You could have destroyed me completely. You had the power. Why didn't you?" He looked out the window, where the street shimmered after a light drizzle. "Because punishment ends when someone learns. Destruction doesn't. I wanted an ending, not wreckage." The words landed softly but deeply. Madison wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "You got your ending, Ethan, and I got mine. You were always the quiet one. Turns out, silence is louder than anything I ever said." She stood to leave, pausing as if waiting for him to stop her, but he didn't. She placed a $10 bill beside her cup and whispered, "Thank you for not hating me out loud." He watched her walk out, sunlight catching briefly in her hair before the door shut behind her. Ethan sat there for a while, the steam from his untouched coffee curling upward like memory fading. Then he took a slow breath and smiled, a real, unforced one. The chapter had closed, not with vengeance, but with understanding. When he left the cafe, the city felt quieter, cleaner, almost new. For the first time in years, there was no part of his past left unresolved, only clarity. And as he walked down the street toward the lake, he realized something simple but profound. Peace wasn't something he'd found. It was something he'd built, one calm decision at a time. Years later, peace had become a habit. Ethan no longer thought in terms of losses or victories. He thought in seasons, school calendars, quarterly reviews, the rhythm of ordinary days that asked for nothing more than presence. The children were older now, their laughter louder, their independence growing like light stretching over the lake outside their new home in Kirkland. Clara was 17, applying to art schools. Mason, 14, obsessed with coding and basketball. Their world was normal, and that was the miracle. After all the noise, it was ordinary again. On Sunday mornings, Ethan still made pancakes the way Madison used to. Thin, golden, with a hint of vanilla. He didn't do it for nostalgia. He did it because the children loved the routine. The house smelled of warmth and butter, sunlight filtering through the tall windows. Every now and then, he caught himself thinking how strange it was that peace required more discipline than revenge ever had. That afternoon, he drove Clara to her art exhibit at a downtown youth gallery. The walls were lined with her sketches, soft, emotional studies of human faces. One piece stopped him cold, a quiet portrait of a man standing by a lake, back turned, reflected in rippling water. Beneath it, the title read, "The Quiet Man." He turned to her, startled. She smiled. "It's not about you, Dad." "Not really. It's about what you taught me. That silence isn't weakness. It's strength that doesn't need an audience." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she walked off to greet her friends, he stayed there staring at the painting. The lines were simple but powerful. It was the closest anyone had ever come to capturing how he felt during those years. The ache, the control, the strange grace of surviving betrayal without letting it rewrite who he was. Later that night, after the exhibit, he drove alone to Lake Union. The city lights had changed, new towers cutting into the skyline, but the water was the same, restless, reflective, eternal. He parked by the pier and sat there, letting memory wash through him one last time. Madison's face flickered briefly in his mind. Not the woman from the scandal, but the one who once believed in him when he was no one. He didn't hate her anymore. In truth, he hadn't for a long time. He whispered into the night almost absently, "I forgive you." The words weren't grand. They were factual, like an accountant closing a ledger that had stayed open too long. A breeze rolled over the water, cool and clean. The past at last felt complete. Back home, he found Clara and Mason asleep on the couch, a half-finished puzzle between them. He sat quietly, watching them breathe, realizing this was all that had ever mattered. He didn't need legacies, documentaries, or books written about him. The real story was here. Peace earned through patience, love rebuilt from silence. He turned off the lights, stood by the window, and watched the moon lay its reflection across the lake. For years, he'd been the man who tore his world apart piece by piece to rebuild it stronger. Now, finally, he was simply a man at peace. No longer the quiet storm, but the calm that follows it. And in that stillness, the story that began with a transfer and a betrayal ended exactly as it should. Quietly, beautifully, with life carrying on.